Welcome to Out with Dan, the podcast that spotlights and examines the voices of LGBTQ+ authors, characters, and our allies. Together, we lift our voices and we tell our stories. I'm Dan White. Join me as I chat with this week's author. Hello and welcome back to Out with Dan. Today I'm excited to talk to James Hanna about his latest work, Because the Night. Welcome, James.
Welcome. Thanks, Dan. I'm not welcoming you anywhere. You were here already.
Well, that's
thanks,
okay.
Dan.
My pleasure. Thank you. We're both welcomed. How's that?
That's perfect.
So before the recording, I asked James if he would read a passage from something before Because the Night, and the short story is called Somewhere Outside of Salvation. It's part of a grifter's song. Will you read a passage for us?
I'd love to. The sudden boom surprised Sam and Rachel, and they both came up off the bed in a snap. Pure instinct and adrenaline. It could have been the report of a shotgun or an explosion. Neither would have been new ground for them. Sam took the pistol off the table and went to the window, pulling back the curtains and blinds. "What the heck was that?" Arjun said. Overhead, thick gray clouds clouded the sky. They hung low and looked angry. Sam could almost smell the petrichor already. "Looks like rain," he said.
I love that. I know when I read this, I thought to myself, James Hanna is definitely on my radar. There is something about when an author is able to make me feel the atmosphere, and I really felt the atmosphere in that. And the entire short story is fantastic. If anyone hasn't read it, it's part of a Grifter's Song series. There are 35 installments, and yours is one of them. I also love the title, Somewhere Outside of Salvation, because it... so how'd you come up with that title?
So that was when I started writing this. So the backstory on this was I was a big fan of this series. It's created by Frank Zafiro, and I had met him the previous year. No, I had met him earlier in the year. Out at Left Coast Crime in Albuquerque, and I told him I was a big fan of the series, and I know the way the series worked was he brought in writers for each installment, each episode. And he had brought in, just these incredible writers, Holly West and Hillary Davidson and S.A. Cosby, Eric Pruitt, it was Gary Phillips. It was just a plethora of great writers. And I was like, would really be interested to write one if you have space anywhere. And he goes, "Sure. You want one?" And then I was like, "Yeah, sure." He goes, "Okay, we'll put you in there." And he's like, if you wanted to write one, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you reach out to me and let me know?" And I was like, "Because I didn't know you could do that." And so then it came down to the point of where I actually have to sit down and write this, because that was that realization of, oh shit, I've actually committed to write this. And again, so many great writers. Frank himself, wonderful writer. He really created these great characters. Sam and Rachel, this great premise where they're con artists on the run from the Philadelphia Mafia. And what I didn't want to do, what you never want to do when you play with someone else's toys, are tear up their toys. You want to be respectful of the creation. But Frank, again, great guy. He's like, very, he had a set of rules. And then he said, but otherwise make it your own. And so nice. I've always written about Appalachia. All of my books take place in West Virginia. I write about Southern West Virginia, Eastern Kentucky. I've always wanted to play in the field of kind of Southern Gothic a little bit. Some Flannery O'Connor, some Harry Crews, things of that nature. And I really kind of wanted to toy with that a little bit. And it came down to the day where I had to send Frank in my outline. And I was like, I don't know what this thing's about. And so I literally wrote the entire outline in about an hour and a half, 2 hours, sent it to him, and realized because the premise of it involves some religious fanaticism, for the kids. salvation, because Kentucky, West Virginia, everything takes place in West Virginia, and West Virginia, towns have just great names, and I thought, here's let's put it in a town, called Salvation, and really lay on the religious, themes of it, which is not it's not when I say religious themes, it's definitely we're definitely playing again with religion, the nature of religious fanaticism, and the toxicity of it.
Well,
So,
it
but I
it is
wanted to go all the way in.
and you did indeed. I'm
I
sure Frank was
appreciate.
not disappointed.
I was really he told me later on how much he enjoyed the installment, and that made me really happy because again there'd been so many great writers before that. Paul Garth had written an extraordinary one, and then you had Curtis Ippolito write in the same season as I did. He wrote actually the penultimate one right before the final episode. So yeah, it was just it was a blast getting to write in that and play outside of what I was normally used to writing.
For the reader too, it was a really nice change up because we get to fall in love with the characters Sam and Rachel, but then we get to see them in different situations and handled by different authors and how those authors handled those. I will say that I felt like yours was probably what I would call the most electrifying. I mean, it sizzled and popped from the first page to the last page with that.
I
And
appreciate that so much, Dan. Thank you.
my pleasure. Well, thank you because it was wonderful to read. And now let's talk about Because the Night. And Henry Malone is making his sixth appearance. Is that correct?
This would be Because the Night. That's the sixth book in my Henry Malone series. It's the first one since Behind the Wall of Sleep, and that one won Seamus for Best Paperback Original back in 2019.
Nice.
And this is the first one since 2019.
Well, I would say Henry is definitely in the graduate school of hard knocks. He doesn't really get much of a pass, does he?
No, Henry routinely gets his ass handed to him like he's at the Wendy's drive-through. He is just I grew up loving PI novels as a kid. I very much from Chandler and then various McDonald's, Hammett, obviously, all of the pulp guys, Race Williams, the guys like that, John Daly Carroll, um, all the way through the like the Shel Scott books from the '60s, and then like when you had Parker and Pronzini and Sharon McCone, not Sharon McCone. That's the character. Marcia Muller, Sarah Paretsky, Sue Grafton. You had these amazing writers kind of reinventing the genre, kind of reinvigorating it. That was very much my fuel when I read in my early teens, and I always wanted to play in that genre. And so but I always lived, like I said, I'd always had lived in Eastern Kentucky and Southern West Virginia, and I didn't know how to write like a big city PI novel. And so what I just decided to do was say the hell with that. I'm putting a PI in Southern West Virginia, and I decided, very much again to be truthful to kind of like the tropes and the expectations, which is Henry's a former West Virginia state trooper. He had to retire after a really terrible injury. He's a recovering alcoholic. He's divorced. He has a loving but difficult relationship with his father. Like any good Disney character, his mother was horribly murdered. And he had a finger, and some white supremacists cut a finger off in the first book. So he's obviously the person most well equipped to handle with a terrible situation. He's actually not well equipped at all, but he is the most stubborn. And Henry's that guy who just kind of plows his way through.
He does, and I think that's one of the things that makes him endearing too, because it really doesn't matter how many times that he gets knocked down. He gets back up one way or another, whether it's with, his friends or on his own, but he simply isn't going to take no for an answer. And I like that. I mean, I think really if you go into that type of work, you really got to be a bit like a pit bull, because you're not going to be a cocker spaniel in the PI world. You've really got to be able to get in there and fight for an answer, because that's what someone has hired you to do, is find out an answer for them.
Exactly, exactly. But also what I really wanted to do with Henry was, again, I was a big fan of like Robert Parker and the Spencer novels, and I've never wanted Henry to be the smartest person in the room. Like I've always said, if Henry is the smartest person in a room, get the hell out of that room. Something terrible is going to happen. And so it was really it's always been important to me that Henry's not the smartest person there. He's not the toughest person. But I wanted him to have that tenacity.
He does have a girlfriend in the book, but then I think he has two male friends that really are so much more like a wife than the girlfriend is. So talk about Jackie and what happens with Jackie in this particular book. So I will say, before you get to that, the barbs back and forth between Henry and Jackie are really, I felt like you'd seen in part of my life, because I'm a smart ass. So I'm like, all of my friends will tell you, it's rare that they ever end the conversation. I have to have one more comment. And I really do feel like Henry and I might be a little bit kin in that relationship. But I love that back and forth between he and Jackie is fierce.
So his friend Jackie Hall is what I would say is probably the last state trooper in the state of West Virginia who will still talk to Henry. Because Henry left under kind of when he left, he was kind of considered a jinx, and so he's still very good friends with Jackie, and Jackie's moved up in the ranks. Jackie's kind of become the cop that maybe at one time Henry would have considered being. And it's not just that. Henry also is married. Henry has children. Henry has the stability that Jackie has the stability, the wife, children, all of these things that Henry doesn't have, that maybe Henry could have had if he had been able to keep himself clean, to stay sober, and to kind of been a more play by the rules kind of guy. And so he has that. And it's never really stated, but he has a bit of jealousy probably for Jackie. And even though Henry's life has improved since the first book, there's still that acknowledgement that he could have gone down a different road. But he and Jackie have remained friends. The book starts out with Henry running for sheriff of Parker County. And he becomes involved with someone asking to help find a missing boyfriend, and that happens to overlay with a homicide investigation of Jackie's. When Jackie and Henry kind of come together for questioning, there's a gunfight, and Jackie's nearly murdered. Jackie's nearly killed. And then and this is not a massive spoiler, but the book really kind of becomes from that point on a chase book and a revenge book, because Henry is very determined to find the person who nearly killed Jackie.
You set up, obviously we see the sniping, the back and forth, the friendship, the camaraderie, and then we also see really the whole buddy thing of it. As you say, it's one of those things that Henry is hell-bent on finding out who did it, and getting justice. And that makes their friendship even much more special because it's not just the frivolous back and forth on the surface. They really are good friends. And it sets up, as you say, a whole deck of cards falling. So it's an amazing thing. So also now on the opposite end of Jackie and Henry is Henry and Woody. So give us a little flavor of who Woody is.
So Woody is Henry's AA sponsor, and in any other book, Woody would probably be the hero. Woody's like the mysterious. He goes back to that the paradigm that Parker established with Hawk, um, or Walter Mosley did with Mouse,
Mhm.
which is and my friend S.A. Cosby uses the term the benevolent sociopath. It's it's the guy who it's the person who can come in and do the wet work, who can do the nasty stuff, who'll beat the shit out of somebody, who's not afraid to get their hands dirty so you can still root for the main character.
And he also, sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. Say he also brings the right weapons that are needed for the situation, and that was something that's very interesting to read.
Yeah, because he's got this big lockbox in the back of his Jeep, Jimmy rigged that. Dear God, help anyone who might be trying to get into that and doesn't know how to. Um, and Woody is not afraid. And I described Woody in one of the earlier books as making Sam Elliott look like a boy band member. So, I mean, he is grizzled beyond belief. And he's also not afraid, he's not afraid to use violence. He's not afraid to hurt someone. He's not afraid to kill someone. Um, but he's also very much a conscience for Henry. Um,
You've done something as a writer there that I think is a little, at least maybe he is a conscious. I mean that conscience. That's one of the things that he does. He picks up Henry time after time, and he picks him up not in a judgmental way. He picks him up in a way of sort of like almost as a master and student, where he's like, okay, let's go again. If you're going to AA, that's what you want for a sponsor. So what you've done is you've taken, a duality here. But Woody is always looking out for Henry. So you sort of feel like he's got Henry's back, which I think Henry gets into enough trouble that he needs someone to have his back.
he does, and again, that was always very much kind of the idea that I wanted with Woody was to make him kind of like a vaguely sociopathic Jiminy Cricket, you know, um, the guy who because very much, and I always say that the Malone books are very much also a Pinocchio story of Henry doing the work to become a real boy, so to speak, to become a better person. And so, what I'm really trying to do with the books, what I really ultimately want to do with the books, is chart that growth, to keep Henry a constantly changing, constantly evolving character, the way that any person would, especially after through the light of all of the violence he's seen, all the change that he experiences. None of that exists in a vacuum. So he has to be able to respond to that, and the books have to be able to respond to that. And so I keep wanting with each new book to kind of push a little bit further and show that. Um, and I hope as I don't know how the books will end, but it'll be with Henry having reached at an ultimate and final point.
That's cool. Are others? Well, I know one every author would like them to keep going, but will there be a seventh one? Do you know yet?
I don't know yet, so I really want to continue writing about Henry because Henry is very much just he's very much part of my subconscious. Um, People, friends of mine who have read the books, will come up to me and they'll be like, "Oh, I enjoyed your book, man. Henry, he's an asshole. He reminds me of you." Well, you're not getting a book dedicated to you then. Um, but Henry's voice is really easy for me to fall into because it's very much kind of my own free, train of thought. I very much want to keep writing the books. I'm working on some standalone projects right now, though, and because I kind of also, so I wrote the first 5 books fairly quickly. They all came out within the course of like 4 years,
Okay. Wow.
and then I had a big gap of time uh, between the fifth and sixth book because because I wanted that next Henry story to feel organic, to feel right. And I struggled finding that organic story. So I have ideas for a seventh book, but I also know that I can't rush that book either because these next couple of books, the next couple of books will be fairly significant and meaningful for Henry.
I think they have to be at this point. I mean, of course, this is me saying it because my opinion doesn't really matter. But if Henry is going to grow, he can't just stumble through everything because he has to find a point to grow to. And he may not have that goal, but it has to sort of step up his story and where he's going with that. One thing you mentioned earlier is they're all set in West Virginia, which is something I'm very appreciative of. I love reading Los Angeles and New York based PI books and police books. Those are interesting to me. But I do realize that we don't just live in those two cities. There are people all across the country doing the same work. They get into slightly different situations, which I think sometimes West Virginia, North Carolina, and Iowa, I think we might even have more options than say we might have in the big city. So it makes it gritty and it makes it interesting for me to read.
It's You really have, I always say that I started writing these books at the exact perfect time. I'm very fortunate that I got to start writing these books, and that they coincided with kind of an influx here in the last several years of really great rural crime fiction
Mhm.
of S.A. Cosby, Eli Craner, Megan Lucas, Kelly J. Ford. Um, you're seeing a lot of female writers. You're seeing writers of color. You're seeing a diversity of stories,
Yep.
and they're telling these stories in Alabama and Mississippi and Virginia
Mhm.
and North Carolina in West Virginia in Kentucky. You're seeing that, and they're telling these stories because these areas are very often economically disadvantaged.
Yes.
You have people sort of just struggling to hold on to what little they have, and they're fighting back against really just decades and decades of tradition. There, you don't have that influx of change in rural communities in Kentucky or North Carolina that you have in New York or Los Angeles or Boston. Um,
True.
and but they're still having to address a changing world. And so it's a fascinating time to be writing in this genre and to see the way that uh, writers are addressing it.
And for this reader, that's very important because I really do like the diversity of it. To me, it gives me something to sink my teeth into, and it also gives me, like you're writing about West Virginia. So I feel like even though I've been to West Virginia, I feel like I'm seeing another part of it that I didn't experience. And so, in the hands of a good writer, what we get is exactly the experience of that region, and I think it's important for us.
It is. I think the authenticity. authenticity and voice and experience is really, really incredibly important, and it's why I think most of us who write rural fiction, uh, we value that. We know the importance of that, and of being able to tell that authentic story. Um,
So are you currently working on something? I mean, I assume all writers are always currently working on something,
we're
but
always working on something all the time. Uh,
even
yeah.
even if
So
it's doodling on a napkin, I get it. So
exactly,
for
exactly.
yours, you said you might have some standalones coming up. Or are you actively working on one that has taken shape, or is that just something on the
So
back burner?
right now. I'm working on a final draft of a book that takes place during the week of the bicentennial, 1976, in a
All
small
righty
town
then.
in eastern Kentucky.
All righty
And
then.
so that one's done, and I'll be putting some final touches on that here through December. I have a story coming out. I'm constantly probably I like writing a lot of short fiction. Um, and short fiction very often becomes my what I write in between like drafts of longer stuff. And my friend
Mhm.
Lori Rader Day looked at me once and she goes, "So your reward for writing is more writing?" Yeah, yeah, because I'm weird that way. Thanks. I've got a short story coming up in Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine called "A Tear in His Hand." That
Okay.
is Appalachian. It's about brothers. It's about all the stuff that I love writing about: family, violence, cast iron skillets. Um, it's my
Grits,
first.
grit, and grits. I got it. I
Exactly. It's
got it.
my first. That it will be out. It's in the January February issue of Ellery Queen. It's my first time in those pages.
Oh, good.
I'm thrilled with that.
Congratulations. Oh, I'm looking forward to it. I subscribed to that, so I'm looking forward to it.
And I also have a story. This story means a lot to me. This story is fairly important. I have a story called "Haggling Over Price" that's in an upcoming anthology called "The 1%."
Okay.
That comes from Rock and a Hard Place magazine,
Mhm.
and this is a story all about. This is a anthology that's about the abuse of power and wealth in America, and so I chose to write about the NRA, the Second Amendment, and gun fetishization.
Just make sure you don't publish your address and you'll be good.
I have said that one way or another, this story will piss you off, and if it does, then I've done my job.
Totally agree. Totally agree. I think Curtis is in this episode as well, right?
Curtis
Curtis
is in
Ippolito?
there. Sam Wiebe, I think that's how you pronounce his name. He's a writer up in Canada. It's a great anthology. Rock and Hard Places, a wonderful magazine. They always put together really great editions. They had a wonderful anthology 2 years ago that S.A. Cosby edited
Okay.
Under the Thumb, which was
Okay.
about
Yep.
police
Yep.
oppression. And that one
Yep.
picked up that one had picked up an Anthony nomination also. So fingers crossed on this one.
I hope you best of luck. Do you have a website or social media you would like to share?
I am all over social media. I am on Blue Sky, Threads, Facebook, whatever ketamine trip Elon Musk is on right now. And you can find me at James D.F. Hanna. And my website is jamesdfhanna.com. There's a sign up for my newsletter there, which I put out once a month, once every couple of weeks, whenever something interesting. It's frequent enough that you don't get bored, and often enough that I don't get bored,
There
or
you
something
go.
like that.
I
Uh,
love it. That's absolutely wonderful. Well, I really appreciate you joining me. This has been so much fun, and I'm looking forward to all the success of Because the Night and all the other projects as well. Thank you so much, James.
Thanks so much, Stan.
Hang on for me just a second. Thank you for joining me for this week's episode of Out with Dan. You can find more information about this podcast and its host at outwithdan.com, on Twitter at outwithdan, and on Instagram and Facebook at GoOutWithDan. This podcast is hosted by Authors on the Air Global Radio Network, and the theme music is provided by bensound.com. Join us again soon for the next episode of Out with Dan.